I would suggest that the people trying to make the canonization decisions cared even more about its accuracy back then than we do now. They had much more at stake. They were more familiar with the kinds of things, both with respect to language and with respect to the different pressures facing the different religious communities then than we are today. Let me say just a little bit about the thesis that Professor McCormick brought up dealing with bereavement hallucinations, and the thesis that he brought up regarding the supernatural belief threshold. He suggests that people during this time period were not adequately skeptical, or at least not as skeptical as we were today, or we are today. But I think that if you read these documents with a cautious but open mind, you'll see that the earlier folks were just as skeptical as we are. And oftentimes, they were just as well educated as we are. Let me just give you one example of this. Paul, in describing his conversion to a number of people, and in proclaiming the resurrection in the best kinds of cities of Asia Minor, like Athens to the philosophers, like Jerusalem to the religious scholars, like Caesarea Philippi to the Roman government officials, he encountered cautious, principled skepticism in each place for different kinds of reasons. Indeed, in one place, a governor even says to Paul, when he's trying to convince the governor of the resurrection, he says, "Paul, your great learning is driving you insane." And then Paul says, "Not true. What I'm saying is most true, and I'm not insane. What I'm saying is true and reasonable, and the events that I'm describing were not done in a corner." Let me mention one other feature before I turn the floor back over to Professor McCormick. I think that the apparent inconsistencies between the different gospel accounts of the resurrection can be dealt with in a number of ways. But I think that the fact that they are even there to begin with, the fact that there are even these apparent inconsistencies, actually works slightly against one of his theses in his presentation. Because he was suggesting that the people who were copying the documents, not the original eyewitnesses, but the copiers, were motivated to preserve the consistency of the documents almost too much. Right? They were almost too zealous to preserve the consistency of these documents, so they would correct them and airbrush them and edit out any inconsistencies. And one of my proposals is that if they really were that motivated to edit out any apparent inconsistencies in the Gospels, why wouldn't they have just airbrushed out the apparent inconsistencies that you see? I suggest it's because they weren't motivated to preserve the apparent consistency at all costs. They were interested in reliability. Here I'll refer one more time to my jury example. When you're on a jury trial, you'll often hear different kinds of witnesses proclaiming different kinds of things. Sometimes the witnesses who agree on a number of features, say the robber's appearance or whatnot, will disagree with each other on some of the minor details, like whether the robber was carrying a gun with the right hand or the left hand, whether the robber was wearing a dark shirt or a sort of light shirt. And there's various ways of explaining away these apparent inconsistencies in eyewitness testimony. But the fact that there is some inconsistency, even if you admit it, even if you admit there's no way to resolve it, does not adequately undercut the core parts of the narrative where the eyewitnesses agree with one another. I suggest that since that's also a principle that we can employ within juries, it's also a principle that you can employ within historical theses like the resurrection. So I'll give Professor McCormick a chance to reply to these and any other points he feels are relevant. Thanks.